Good to see you. Hello? Is anybody there? I should have opened my Bible before I came out, but I didn't. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Rachel, for that glowing introduction. That was amazing. Quite funny. Thank you. Hugely encouraging. And commenting on the pace of my walk. I feel really encouraged right now. Ready to go. I'm going to set a timer. I've been told that I can't speak for a long time. That's not a timer. That's a compass. That's not what we want, is it? Oh, no. This is not good. Oh. Sam, what's... praise the Lord. Oh, North's that way, by the way, if you're interested. Good to see you. Okay. So I'm Tom. I'm the vicar. And I've been vicar for a couple of years. I've been in Sheffield for 8 years and done bits and bobs. So it's a great joy to be able to welcome you if it's your first time. We're going to be diving in today to Luke chapter 15, which is possibly one of my favourite bits of the whole of the New Testament. And it's one of my five talks. So it's a great joy. And we're going to do this in two parts. So we're going to be looking at the first bit of Luke chapter 15. And then we are going to be looking at the latter half next week, which is a story of the prodigal son, which is absolutely amazing. It is a mind-blowing, beautiful story. So I've been told that your generation, these are not my words, these are the words of Samuel Watson, sat here in the front row, sam.watson@stcsheffield.org if you have any complaints. But he says that your generation have zero concentration or attention span, okay? I don't believe it, but that's what he says. So I'm going to ask you a question. And the question is, when you think of sheep, okay, do you think they're really brilliant? I love sheep. They're really smart. What do you think about sheep? It's a genuine question. I'm not messing about here. Turn to the person next to you. When you think about sheep, what comes to your mind? Go. Okay, sheep. What we're going to read about sheep. If you've got a Bible, if you turn to Luke chapter 15, or you've got a Bible app on your phone, if you grab it, let's read this together. And I'm just going to kind of highlight a few things as we read this now, and I'd love you to try and hold them. And we're going to circle back and think on this passage over the next 45 minutes to an hour and a half. Thank you. Hey, you're awake. So these are the words of Jesus. That's what we're thinking about in the evening over these next couple. We're looking at the words of Jesus. This is what Jesus, this story that Jesus tells us. So just listen to this. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? When he finds it, just listen to this, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and he says, "Rejoice with me. I found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? But when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me. I found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Oh, brilliant. So, okay, let's just set the scene now. So Jesus is speaking in a kind of agricultural context. He's speaking to people who are familiar with farming. They're familiar with working the land. So whenever Jesus tells a story, he is the absolute master storyteller. He's incredible. There is a book out about Jesus' humor and how he was almost like a stand-up comedian. Personally, I find that incredibly encouraging. Now, not only is Jesus has an incredible ability to connect with people, he's also speaking to a wider narrative that is going on, which is the predominant narrative of the day. And that breaks down, the key kind of question is, what does it look like? What does it look like to be truly God's people? That is the question that people are wrestling with. In the same way that whether you're watching political debates, whether you watched the debate in the States last week, I've got 2 dogs. I'm terrified that people are eating dogs. I've got a cat as well. It's a joke. If you don't know what I'm talking about, forget it. Don't worry about it. But there is this debate about what nations will look like. This was the kind of debate that was happening because Palestine was occupied by Rome. Here is this massive imperial power impressing upon them its own values in a violent and oppressive way. So the people of Israel in that time were saying, well, what does it look like for us to live for God in this time? There were these kind of questions, and there were 4 groups of people, roughly. There were the people called the Essenes. And what happened is they had said, for us to be truly the people of God, we should retreat from the world and we should go and live in the desert. Not bad. Let's just get out of here. This place is toxic. We're just going to go and live in the desert, away from everybody. And we can live this pure form of religious life. And then there were the zealots. And they were the justice warriors. Some said they were terrorists. And they would, through the force of arms, they could push back the Roman forces. And they could bring this vision of what God's kingdom might look like. And then there were the Sadducees. Now, they didn't believe in the resurrection, hence why they were sad, you see. Boom. Didn't work, but it's an old joke. Occasionally people find it funny. But here's the thing, the Sadducees were super pragmatic. This is kind of really pejorative, so any biblical scholars out there, yes, you will take issue with what I'm saying, that's fine. And so the Sadducees were pragmatic. I thought, well, hey, how about if we work with Rome, that might mean that we have to compromise bits and bobs, but we can work with them, and we can bring influence, and so we'll be very pragmatic. And people hated them for that. They thought they'd sold out. And then the other kind of group of people were the Pharisees. Now, whenever you hear the Pharisees mentioned, often people like me talk about the Pharisees, they're often describing like a pantomime baddie. So when you hear the Pharisees, people are like, boo, they're really bad, they're evil. But actually, I want to make a case for the Pharisees. So the Pharisees were the people who wanted to make Israel great again. They were the people who were desperate. They were hungry for God to move. They wanted to make it. They wanted to make it like it was in the old days. And they wanted to get it right. They were earnest, they were passionate, and they were moral people. And they wanted to do the things that they believed God wanted them to do. So they took a stand and defended the values against a prevailing culture. They were kind of the culture warriors of their time. And then Jesus is beginning to he's like gone in his crosshairs because they're watching him. And what's happening is they're seeing that Jesus is hanging out with what we're just told here is sinners, tax collectors and sinners. Now, a tax collector was most probably somebody who was Jewish, who'd defected to go work for Rome. And if you think about the oppressive nature of all the things that Rome were doing, they were taxing to the hilt. And you think somebody who you think is one of you, somebody who should know better, goes and works with the enemy. You would hate them, and they were hated. If you've ever watched The Chosen, it's beautifully depicted, I think, in the character of Matthew. It's this beautiful encounter, which you see Jesus encounter him. But they are hated with a deep passion. And then the sinners are the people who could have physical diseases, which mean that they would be ostracized. They could be people who we know that they're people who earn their money through immoral ways. And so here is Jesus in the midst who is seeing a movement begin to birth of his incredible teaching. And the Pharisees are like, like if you look, like this thing of confirmation bias, you always look for information and narratives that confirm what you're looking for. And here is Jesus who is going to smash that out of the window. And the Pharisees are watching him thinking, how can he be who he says he is if he spends time with these people? And I want to share a confession. When I was training to be a vicar, which is probably 18, 19 years ago now, I was 5 when I started because I was just so advanced for my age. Just skipped school, just went straight to vicar school. That's obviously clearly not true, and you didn't laugh, that's okay, I'll just keep going. And we had to do a little mission, and I was part of a group of people, and we did a mission at a place called Battelle, which is a drug rehab that's around the world, but we went to its UK headquarters, which is in Birmingham. That's my home kind of city. My dad was from there. So it was amazing to go back. And I just want to cut a lot out of that story. But there was this particular moment where we were doing gardening and we were working with these guys who were in recovery. A lot of these guys have been in and out of prison. They had some really colourful stories. I remember driving a van around Birmingham with a guy who had been a football hooligan, and he loved Aston Villa, which is good. So did my dad, so we got on. But he'd been a really violent football hooligan, and then his life had been radically changed by Jesus. And they were driving around. It was crazy. And we were part of a gardening team, and because I had a clean driving license, which was a rarity amongst some of these guys, I was the one who's driving the van. Now, we'd been working all day. I had more hair than I do now, but I didn't have a huge amount. So we pulled up at this lady's house because we were about to do this job. I was wearing tracksuit bottoms, this dirty T-shirt. I was filthy with not a lot of hair on my head. And she starts to talk to me, this lady, and she said, so, she knew what the organisation was about, and she started to say, so, obviously life's been quite hard for you, and how longer? And I'm chatting to her, and I think she thinks I'm one of them. She thinks I'm in recovery, and I had this moment where I was just, but no, hang on a minute. I'm trained to be a vicar in Oxford. I may look like I belong on Crime Watch, but let me tell you. And I had this moment where I thought, do I say, oh, no, I'm just the driver? Because she thought, and I had this, it was this almost in this minute, I thought, gosh, have I turned into this snob? And Jesus has this incredible ability to connect with people that no other person was connecting with in the same way. That the Son of God would choose to sit and eat in a culture where if you have a meal with somebody, you're showing acceptance and love and grace. It is this beautiful picture of the economy of God. It is a profound thing, and it's highly offensive. And then Jesus tells a story to illustrate to the Pharisees what he's talking about. And he says that there's a man who has 100 sheep. Now, let's put this into context. The average shepherd in this way would have between 5 and 15 sheep. And so this person is absolutely off the scale loaded. They are absolutely loaded. They're really rich. So by virtue, you think, well, if you lose one, it doesn't really matter. Because if you've got this amount of money, you're not going to miss one. But we're told in the story that he sees that one goes missing. And he decides to go and find it. Now, here's the thing. Being a shepherd is you are going to face huge amounts of threats. Because you need to protect your sheep from the wild animals. You need to protect them from robbers. Violence is part of it. And you have to always be moving your sheep to where it is they can eat their next meal. And so here's a sheep who has wandered off. Now, why would a sheep wander off? Well, let me illustrate this. If you've ever driven to Manchester from Sheffield, two relatively large cities in this United Kingdom, joined by two relatively small roads. One really is designed for a horse and cart and isn't a lot better, in my humble opinion. But if you do drive to Manchester along the A57, which you just come out this road here, take a right onto the Manchester Road, and you'll go over the Snokes Pass, stunning views, but you could possibly kill a sheep if you're not careful, because they do get loose. Why do they get loose? They get loose because they are eating. And so Jesus is big. Everybody who's listening to the story knows, but the sheep has kind of wandered off. Why has the sheep wandered off? Probably because it's looking for food, and that's an issue. Because the sheep represents what it is to be lost. What is it to be lost? Now, here's what it means to be lost. It means that you become disconnected from all your other sheep. You see, it is the job of the shepherd to provide the sheep with fresh food. But what's happened here is that the sheep has wandered off through following its own desires, following its own kind of default to follow its own food, and it's become disconnected from the rest of the flock. Therefore, it is now lost. It is the very definition of lost. It has become disconnected. And that's the kind of sense of how we understand sin. See, I grew up thinking that sin is a list of all the wrong things that I've done. But yet there is a deeper understanding of sin. And an understanding of sin, which I find so much more helpful, is when we go our own way, when we live independently from God. And so what's happened is Jesus is telling a story using this very, very familiar picture, which everybody would have known about a sheep and a shepherd, and in a few moments when we land, we'll say why. And then he says that this is a definition of what it is to be lost. It is to become disconnected from the shepherd. It is become disconnected from the flock and find yourself lost. It is the definition of lostness is when we pursue the things, our own desires. It's when we pursue the things, if we don't address anger, for example, it becomes to eat us, and we can find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be, in a situation that we don't want to be in. When I was spending time with these guys in a drug rehab, all of them had a story of finding themselves in a place that they did not choose but ended up in. Friends, our city is full of thousands of people right now who would describe themselves as being lost. They're stuck. And the Pharisees are like, yeah, but you're eating with them. It's all those sex people. Those tax collectors, filthy tax collectors. Yeah, they're lost. Look at them. Yeah. And Jesus, they go, yeah, no wonder they're lost. The Pharisees weren't Cockneys, by the way. But I think they'd be good Cockneys. And Jesus says, so this really wealthy shepherd, what's he going to do? He goes and looks for him. He goes and searches for that one sheep because it is of value to him. It's valuable. And he finds the sheep. What he does is he picks the sheep up. Now, I have 2 Labradors. They're about 21 kilograms. Now, sheep, when their wool, and he said fur, when their wool grows massive, they get really, really, really heavy. So you imagine, now I can lift my dog for a short amount of time. But what happens is the shepherd would come, and this is a practice that still happens today in parts of the world where you can't access with a vehicle. But the shepherd would come and he'd grab the sheep and he'd tie its legs together, which sounds really cruel, but it's to stop it in its path of walking away. And he grabs it, and the shepherd puts it on his shoulder. Incredible image. And he walks it home. He takes it back. And here's the thing. And this is the thing that we're going to journey with tonight and next week. And this is the thing that Jesus would have said, which would have been so offensive to the Make Israel Great Again gang, the moralists, the one who got it right. Because they were quick to point out who the people are who were wrong. And in my heart that day, in an April day in Birmingham, when I realized that this lady thought that I was in recovery, and I was quick to say, no, not me. That's them, I'm different, is that Jesus begins to say, here's the thing. You can be religious and right and just as lost. Because the lostness is what it is you build your life on. And this is where Jesus is nailing confirmation bias. And he's saying, if you build your life on your ability to be right and your ability to do right things, you don't need God. You don't need a savior. And so Jesus is beginning to say, look, this sheep carried by the shepherd, and he takes it home and he has this incredible celebration. And the shepherd says, I found the sheep. Oh, it's on its way to Manchester. Nearly got killed by a guy driving a Ford Fiesta, Richard Pollard. But I rescued it. It's all right, let's have a brew. And he says the 99, they're all lost. So which one was lost? The righteous ones? The ones who get it all right? Or that sheep that he carries? And we're told in John 10, I think it's on the next slide here. It says that Jesus tells us that he is the good shepherd. And if you know the scriptures in Ezekiel 37, it describes that the Messiah, there is one who is the perfect shepherd. And he's the one who's going to lay down his life for his sheep, and his sheep know his voice. There's an invitation to us today. To the one who leaves the 99 and goes and finds the one. Jesus is challenging the different ways of how we understand God's kingdom to come. We are very, very, very quick to say they're in and they're out. And Jesus holds up a mirror to the Pharisees, and they have good hearts, and they're moral, and they get it right. You probably wouldn't want to be in a table with them because they'd know the Greek. And you'd never break wind in front of them either because they wouldn't like that. They're the people that make you feel guilty or can make you feel a bit ashamed. And yet Jesus says they're just as lost. It's anything, any religiosity, anything that we build an identity, any trust we place in our own abilities to earn our salvation. That is the definition of religion. And yet Jesus invites us to encounter the passionate love of the true and good shepherd who embraces us, carries us on our shoulder, and takes us home. So Bethel, although it was 18 odd years ago, was a life-changing experience for me. There was a profoundly beautiful moment where we were sharing communion. And if you heard me say this before, I make no apology because I've only got 5 talks and I like to recycle. And so we're breaking bread. It's non-alcoholic wine, these rather naff paper cups and paper plates. And there's this guy who I'd got to know a bit. And in the communion, we're passing around this is pre-COVID, obviously, pre-kind of hygiene issues like that. And he turns to me and he passes me this lump of bread. And this guy, massive prison, all kinds, in and out of prison and all this kind of stuff, crazy life. And he thrust this bit of bread in my hand. And he said, if it wasn't for him, he says, I'd be dead. And it was the most beautiful, joyous. Now, I'm an Anglican. We do communion. Not like you Baptists. You think you do. Your little cups. Oh, 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, that's it. Move on. We do it proper. We have silver. Oh, we're not messing about. And do you know what? It's so dull sometimes. Oh, my days. Because if we don't know we need him, if we don't know we need him, if we don't know that we're far from him, when we know that we cannot save ourselves and our trust is totally on what he has done for us, taking upon him the sin of the world, taking my sin or my CRAP, all of the stuff, and in that beautiful exchange gives freedom of life and embraces us and says, I have a better life for you. That's why they celebrate. That's why they party. And that's why when you hang out with Christians who were once far from Jesus, far from the church, you see a twinkle in their eye because they have a deep joy that only comes from encountering the grace and beauty of Jesus. And that is why sometimes when you're with religious people, you counter the opposite. It's kind of this anal retention. And it's joyless because it leads to spiritual death. So Jesus knows what the Pharisees are saying. And he describes himself in John as the good shepherd and says, those over there, they're mine. And he says to you and he says to me, you're mine. He knows what's happened. And maybe here today and something happened over the weekend and just like, if only people knew. He knows. And you're loved. A man called Timothy Keller, incredible man of God, describes the gospel as this, that you're fully known. He knows everything. Isn't that terrifying? He knows everything. This sheep was lost, following its own desires, going its own way. We can be as lost, even if we're in the church. Be a vicar, and just as lost. And yet Jesus connects with him, reaches out to him. The gospel is this. You're fully known, and yet you're fully loved. And what we're going to do over these next few weeks is we are going to journey with the very words of Jesus Christ. And it's going to smash any confirmation bias as he draws us close to his heart. And for some of us, reaches out to us where we're lost. And he says, I got you now. I got you now. I know. Puts you on your shoulders, puts you on his shoulders. Says, I'm going to take you home. And that could be because you're in addictions you can't shake off. You're doing stuff you don't want to do. Or it could be you're locked into a religious mindset. We have no joy. And God is not doing what you think he should do. And he's not approving in the way that you think he should. And you feel lost. But the Good Shepherd of these next few weeks will reveal himself to us afresh.